Hi, fantasy readers. This is Corinne Norton, your fellow book binger, and you are listening to the Finding Fantasy Reads podcast, where you can test out a new fantasy story every single week to find your next favorite author. You'll want to stick around for today's story if you like classic fantasy that pits good against evil. It's written by Drew Avera, who is a Navy veteran, sci-fi author, although I swear today's story is fantasy, and an orchestral composer. He admits that all of his creative interests are a bit on the nerdy side, but that's the way he likes it, and that's what's important. Besides, if you're listening to a podcast featuring fantasy short stories, I'm guessing you don't have a problem with it either. Today's narrator is Paeter Frandsen, host of Christian Geek Central. Stick around to the end or check out today's show notes to see where you can find more from both the author and the narrator, as well as a couple of fun announcements about the podcast. For now, please enjoy Keeper of Light by Drew Avera.
Darkness swept the area as Adrius darted between the giant spindles stretching toward the sky. The tendril-like spires of tree carcasses were reduced to claws, gnarling into the nothingness above. The forest surrounding the nearby lakes was once enchanted, full of magic and wonderment, but now it was as dead as the souls of those consumed by the invading darkness, lifeless, just like the magic ensnaring the land. There was a time when the small lakes of Bonita were a haven for life. Now they hardly twinkled under the dim sunlight. He dared a peek at the barely glinting sun. Its rays struggled to break through the crimson haze choking the sky. He trembled from the mere thought of the evil that caused this destruction. If even the heavens could lose their light, then what did that mean for Meridia? A shiver ran down his spine. As above, so below, he thought. Adrius moved with a purpose down the bank leading to the water. It was hot as a dragon's breath and twice as humid. His journey westward was long, and he hoped the dark waters could at least cool him off, even if only for a moment. He dipped his hands in. The water was hardly cold, but cooler than the ambient air around him. "I'll take it," he whispered before splashing some on his face. Adrius closed his eyes and muttered a quiet prayer. It was intended to be for protection, but he selfishly hoped the burden of what he came to do could be lifted from his shoulders. Sadly, there was hardly faith enough in this world to put any hope into that happening. Adrius glared at his reflection. Droplets fell from his chin and rippled outward, distorting his image in the disturbed water. His was the first face he'd seen since leaving the small town he'd called home since leaving Meridia. The days Adrius traveled towards his childhood home had been a blur. Now, as he entered the area he once knew, he realized how much he had forgotten about this place. Gone were the buildings and monuments erected to their ancestors' greatness. In their place was a wasteland. Meridia had crumbled into a shell of her former self. "And so am I," he thought. He was once a child full of hope, the son of the protector, the keeper of light, but all of that died long ago. Adrius rose and overlooked Meridia. Despite what he had seen, he doubted the stories his family told about the source of the true power he sought. The light stone supposedly contained the power of the first god. If the stories were true, then it could restore the light, and the lives lost to the darkness. The light stone had been passed down over generations for protection, but for the world to have grown so cold, he wondered who the protector was, and who was protected. Neither, if he had to wager. Folklore wasn't without its deceptions. He presumed the light stone was nothing more than a relic of a misunderstood time. But it's better to misunderstand the past than to endure a future like this, he thought solemnly. Still, despite his doubts, he returned to Meridia. His quest was to reclaim the light stone and save the place he once called home from the darkness consuming it, and set free those bound by it. It was their final hope. Adrius scoffed at the thought. Hope is nothing if not fleeting. He moved forward, hiking the steep hill on the balls of his feet, careful with his footing. The precipice of destruction had started here more than half his life ago, just over this very rise. A sight laid witness to an invasion that caught everyone off guard by an enemy bearing the face of a friend. It wasn't until it was too late that people realized the magic they placed their hope in had been perverted and used for treachery. Everyone paid the toll. Some more than others. And some were still paying. At the top, he surveyed the land. Scattered ruins protruded from the surface like tombstones in memory of what was. Most of it was buried by time and overtaken by pervasive vines choking out anything daring to have the audacity to live. Adrius walked to the center court, or what was left of it. The sludge inside the crumbled fountain resembled a swamp and reeked of decay and rot. This was where the Lightstone had been placed so many years ago. Adrius hardly recognized this place, yet he knew the Lightstone resided here. He felt it like he felt his heartbeat. Adrius held his breath and dared to reach in. He watched as if he was someone else, anticipation keeping him from releasing his breath when his hand disappeared below the surface. There, beneath the grime of forgotten yesterdays, his fingers found purchase on something smooth and solid. He expected to feel something when he touched it, but it felt as lifeless as the rest of Meridia. Adrius exhaled, pulling with all his might as suction from the sludge fought to keep its treasure. He yanked, shoving off the edge of the fountain with his feet until it let loose, and he fell back. He landed hard, biting his tongue, but he paid no attention to the pain or the taste of blood in his mouth. His eyes widened. For the first time since his childhood, he beheld the Lightstone. It was perfectly clean, as if the filth hadn't touched it. That was when he noticed something he had never seen before, or at least remembered. The Lightstone glowed with an unnatural light. Was that its power? Could this mean the stories were true? Adrius wanted to believe, but his heart wallowed in doubt. "I can't let you take that," a voice said behind him. He didn't have to turn to know who belonged to that gruff voice, and despite years of separation, Adrius couldn't fight the chill running down his spine. "I'm the keeper now. It's my duty," Adrius replied. "I'm not done yet, kid. You'll have to wait your turn." Adrius turned slowly, willing himself to look the man in the eye, no matter how painful it was. "I know you believe that, Father, but you've been gone a long time. The darkness has taken hold of this world. It just won't let you leave." The embodiment of Matthias, Keeper of Light, stood before him, ageless as the day he'd passed from the mortal realm into something much worse. His eyes bore into Adrius's, straight into his son's soul. "Adrius, look how much you've grown. You're a man now." Adrius swallowed the knot in his throat. This was why he refused his destiny for so long. He couldn't bear to see his father. Living with the invading darkness had been easier than he knew this moment would be. It was only at the urging of his uncle that he returned to face his fate. "Where is the Dragon King?" Adrius asked, switching the subject in hopes it would lessen the sorrow growing inside of him. His heart wanted to savor this reunion, but he couldn't allow himself to linger in such a distraction from his mission. "I've come to put an end to this." The Dragon King was close. Otherwise, his father's spirit would not have appeared to him. As near as Adrius could tell, after his father battled the Dragon King, both became prisoners of this place. Both were held captive by the magic used to usher in the darkness. The Lightstone wasn't merely a weapon. It was the key to usurping the Dragon King's power. Wielded by the right person, it could undo all that had been done, but not without a price. Matthias frowned, and Adrius wondered if his father had accepted the death he'd endured. It couldn't be easy being held prisoner between life and death. He hoped when this was over his father would find peace. Despite what happened, he deserved that much. Matthias sighed and looked toward the roiling storm clouds in the distance. "He's where he's always been." Adrius followed his father's gaze. Through the flickers of lightning, a familiar shape rose defiantly from the horizon. Theoroft had been the tallest tower in Meridia. From the horrors that befell the city, it remained the only one left, the seat of power against a backdrop of barren waste.
He set himself up as more than the Dragon King,
Matthias said woefully.
He rules everything from his perch above the city.
Adrius wondered who was left to rule. Regarding his father, a terrible, unrealized truth formed. If death wasn't an escape for Matthias, then perhaps many others were bound to this realm as well. He peered at the Lightstone, hoping with everything he had left that he could undo this dark magic and set things right. He'd traveled so far fueled by anger and despair, he couldn't fathom all the pain and sorrow being for nothing. Adrius looked to the disembodied soul of his father and said, "He won't rule anything for long." He began his descent from the hilltop and set his eyes on the tower looming above the forgotten city of Meridia. Crumbled roads wove through the landscape, interspersed with withering vegetation. "It's all come to this," he thought with a sense of dread. "I'm marching to my own demise." When he peered at the sky, it somehow appeared to darken with each step.
"You don't have to do this, son."
Matthias's ghost appeared beside him, walking in step, though his feet didn't seem to touch the ground. "Who else is there?" Adrius asked, not expecting the spirit to answer. How could a dead man know the things of the living world? For all he knew, the apparition was just part of the Dragon King's dark magic. He had been forewarned that was possible. Was the appearance of his father proof of the deception other survivors told him Matthias had fallen for, cursing the entire world with his failure? Adrius bit back his resentment. "I do what I'm called to do. Nothing more
and nothing less,"
Matthias replied.
"You'll be the death of me."
Adrius cut his eyes at the spirit, but he was gone. He scoffed at the thought that maybe his father had intended for that remark to be a joke. It had been so long, he couldn't remember if the former protector of light even had a sense of humor. Adrius decided it was best not to dwell on it. Besides, all joy had turned to dust. "Nothing less," he whispered. Adrius stood at the foot of Theoroft and trembled. He hated heights. In his youth, he often claimed it wasn't fear, but a healthy respect for what would happen if he slipped. In truth, that was just his feigning bravado. He was more afraid of falling than he was of the beast at the top. But he refused to let fear be his master. Adrius gripped a stone bulging from the tower wall and pulled himself upward. "Don't look down," he reminded himself. He was the only one who could save Meridia now. He moved from foothold to foothold, careful to pause between steps to secure his footing, fighting against the unexpected slippery stones. And it got worse the closer to the top he got. He slipped and scrambled to grab hold of a protruding stone before he plummeted to his certain death. Adrius cursed under his breath. He still had a long climb ahead. His fingers ached and his arms shook. Still, he resolved to push forward.
"Son, you need to listen to reason,"
his father said. The apparition appeared next to him, hovering far above the ground.
"You don't have to pursue this fight. You don't know what he is capable of."
Adrius strained to move up to another ledge before resting. Once he had his feet settled, he let out a breath and glared at the evil spirit. "You would have me quit before I even tried? It sounds like you're working for him. Is that what happened? He turned you away from us and then killed you?" Matthias's face turned grim.
"He did try to sway me. That much is true. But his trickery did not lead me to my death."
"Then what did?" Adrius shook out his arms and tried to relieve the tension in his hands.
"It is what he showed me was to happen that made me stumble. It was a distraction. Doubt."
Adrius scoffed. "That sounds an awful lot like trickery to me." Matthias continued.
"He showed me the truth about myself, and I hesitated. It was no trick. The conviction I felt was the truest window into my soul I had ever experienced."
Adrius bit his tongue. He hoped reuniting with his slain father's soul would have given him closure, but all it did was fill him with resentment and existential dread. "I hope you're wrong," Adrius said flatly. He exhaled and leaped to gain a handhold above him, hauling himself upward. Exhaustion chipped away at his strength that no amount of conditioning could have prepared him for. He stretched his right leg up to a foothold, but this time the weather-worn stone crumbled under his weight. "Ah!" He snapped his mouth shut, cutting off his fearful cry. He couldn't afford to give his position away. The element of surprise was his only hope. Adrius kicked, grappling for a stone to bear his weight. After a fight, he found purchase and shoved himself upward. He scaled the rest of the way without incident, biting back the burning pain shooting down his extremities. He rolled over the ledge, collapsing at the top of the tower. Through tear-filled eyes, he stared at the crimson sky. Adrius choked back a sob. Even if his father was wrong, the morning of his imminent demise drew nearer. There was no going back now. Adrius rolled over and pushed himself to his feet. He gripped the lightstone in his pocket with one hand as he drew his sword with the other. It felt 3 times heavier after the climb, and he struggled to hold the blade up. Adrius made his way to the interior. Torches lit his path from the high walls, casting shadows against the dark stones. He mumbled another prayer, all too aware his words were playing catch-up for all the times he ignored his faith in the past. The Keeper knew what was coming, and all he wanted was a clean conscience before meeting his Maker. That or immortality, he thought. The path opened to a large space. He marveled at it. The construction was more beautiful than any place he'd seen in years, perhaps ever. Torchlight refracted through a series of crystals, painting the bulk of the area in a beautiful glow. It was the opposite of the terror outside of the tower walls. He took it in, allowing the magnificence to calm him, but a sound drew his attention, and Adrius canted his eyes to the right. At first, he saw nothing, and then the shadows moved. "It's been so long since I've had a guest. Please excuse the mess." Adrius expected a beast, but he was met with a man. At first, he appeared perfectly normal, unassuming. On any other day, Adrius might have thought the man was human, until he saw the eyes. They were pitch-black orbs, devoid of any light at all. "So you're the Dragon King?" Adrius asked, though his tone made it sound more like that of a statement. He squared up with the approaching man, measuring him up. Adrius had fought bigger, but they were all mortals. A wicked smile curled his lips, and Adrius swallowed, choking down his rising fear. "That is their name for me," the man replied, gesturing to a pile of bones in the far corner, "though I haven't heard them say it in years. I am Baros, King of Meridia. What brings you to my throne room?" Adrius lifted the tip of his sword higher, drawing the Dragon King's attention to it. It glistened like the crystals above. Baros merely chuckled. "You set yourself up as king, and you took everything from us," Adrius answered, his fear giving way to rage. I see. And do you think that killing me will somehow make things right? Have you not been forewarned as to what you are going up against?" Adrius peered down at his blade, and then back up at Baros. The Dragon King's eyes appeared to come to life, flickering with internal fire. There was a hypnotizing power radiating from his maniacal stare. Adrius looked away. "Don't look at his eyes," he warned himself. It was the last words his uncle said to him before he left. "I will admit that I have grown lonely as of late. I'll entertain your little crusade." The playful, sinister banter of a madman caused the hairs on the back of Adrius's neck to rise. "I won't let you destroy the world with your wickedness," the Keeper said defiantly. He willed himself to stand his ground, ignoring the shakiness of his legs. Baros smiled. "My wickedness? Perhaps you've listened to too many fairy tales. Your people turned on me once they had a taste of my power. They drained me until I was weak from accommodating them with their bidding. In the end, I had no choice but to defend myself. If I were as evil as you claim, then you would have been destroyed upon entering my kingdom." A wave of doubt crashed over Adreus. All his life he'd heard of the evil the Dragon King unleashed on his people. He was also aware the citizens of Meridia chose Barros to lead them. It always struck him as odd how humanity had suffered for the magic they desired. Was Barros right? He wondered. No. "You won't sway me with your lies." Adreus gripped the sword tighter and marched towards the man, slashing out in a wide arc. Barros leaned back, the tip narrowly missing his nose. The Dragon King did not strike back. Instead, he simply cast a taunting smile. Adreus vaulted twice more, lunging with the blade. Each time he missed as Barros moved with unnatural speed. A fourth, exhausting strike from overhead sent Adreus stumbling forward. He swung his body around in time to meet Barros's counterblow to his midsection. Adreus groaned, holding his side as he struggled to breathe through the pain of cracked ribs. He sucked hard, each breath another assault on his trembling body.
"I expected more from a keeper," Barros said, his voice a low growl. "I haven't yet begun to fight, yet you are moments from breaking."
He clicked his tongue tauntingly.
"Perhaps the former keeper should not have left his mortal coil before training his replacement, huh?"
Adreus's eyes burned with hate. The keeper spit an expletive, raised his weapon, and charged. He put everything he had into each slash of his blade. After a rapid succession, he spun on his heels and prepared to strike again. Each thrust sent Adreus stumbling as the heavy sword yanked him off balance. Despite it all, the Dragon King ducked and struck with a closed fist, connecting with Adreus's cheek. The punch sent the keeper to the ground in a scraping halt.
"You would save yourself a lot of pain by simply throwing yourself over the side and letting nature take its course. Perhaps the vultures will benefit from your trespassing."
Adreus crawled away from the Dragon King, dragging his sword with him. He panted in a vain attempt to catch his breath, but his head was fogged and his breath jagged. Barros swayed towards him like a feather in the wind.
"Your father fared better than you. I thought you would want to know before you meet him. Oh, imagine his disappointment at his only son mired in failure."
Adreus's lips trembled. Deep down, he knew Barros was trying to deceive him, though that didn't dissuade how often he worried about standing up to his father's legacy. The fear of failure was painted heavy on his heart, even if he never spoke it aloud. He was a failure. Adreus saw it in his uncle's eyes when they fled so many years ago. He never stopped seeing the constant reminder that he chose his own life over doing what was right. Adreus was supposed to be the keeper of light, yet he had abandoned his call and hid away like a coward. Good intentions couldn't account for his folly. Even his arrival on this day was marred by years of neglecting his duty. Barros clicked his tongue, drawing the keeper's attention. It was like the Dragon King knew what Adreus was thinking when he said,
"Your failure will bring about the destruction of humanity. Though, if it's any consolation, no one even knows who you are."
Adreus boiled with rage. He stampeded towards the Dragon King with his sword raised high. He leaped, bringing the blade in a wide arch with all his might. He grimaced from the expectant contact, but Barros spun out of the way, the blade narrowly missing him yet again. As Adreus turned to prepare for another strike, his heart jumped in his throat. Gone was the human embodiment of evil. In its place unfolded the Dragon King in his true form. Steam escaped the serpent's giant nostrils, pulsing with radiating heat at every breath. His lips curled back, revealing pearly fangs, and his dark eyes glowered at the mortal with contempt.
"I grow weary of you, boy."
Adreus's heart raced furiously, pounding his ears with the sound of a war drum. "I can no longer abide your darkness," he said. It's time you returned to the depths of the abyss where you belong. The keeper pulled the lightstone from his pocket and raised it between them. It shone with a radiance rivaling the masked sunlight above them. Barros hissed. Your trinkets hold no power here. I am the source of all magic. I am all-powerful. He lashed out with dagger-sharp talons. Adreus spun, but not quickly enough. The Dragon King's claws caught hold and flung Adreus towards the stone wall. The keeper slammed into it with a dull thud. Adreus scrambled to recover, but Barros was on him. Adreus's skin boiled from the close proximity of Barros's steam-filled breath, forcing him to cover himself with his arms. Adreus howled in fear, but kept the lightstone lifted as a shield. He dared a glance, bearing witness to flames licking the air around him. None of the fiery tendrils touched his body. The lightstone is working, he thought, his faith on the verge of restoration. Adreus lashed out with his sword, but the Dragon King deflected the blade with a heavy swipe, knocking the weapon from Adreus's hand. Barros roared triumphantly, sending a pillar of raging fire skyward. He slashed and swiped at Adreus, forcing the human to scurry back on his rear. The keeper winced with each strike, but the magic of the lightstone miraculously defended him from the Dragon King's talons. Adreus sucked in a breath and spat in defiance. I will be the one to vanquish you to the abyss from whence you came, beast. Adreus pushed forward, lifting the lightstone for protection. He willed the magic within to burn brighter, to cast its radiance forth and destroy the evil before him. The keeper pressed on and used the power of the lightstone to send the Dragon King back until his hind legs were on the edge. What do you expect to happen now? If you kill me, then all the souls claimed in this realm will cease to exist. Can you stand to lose your father again? With those words, the ghost of Matthias appeared. Only this time, he was shackled in flaming chains, his face a scene of agony. Defeat. Adreus swallowed the knot forming in his throat. Father, he whispered. Gone was the version of the spirit he'd seen before, the one warding him away from this place. In its place was misery incarnate. The former keeper of light appeared as nothing more than a broken man. Yes, he will be gone forever unless you lay the stone at my feet and surrender its power to me. Do so, and I'll release him from captivity and let you leave in peace. The last word hung in the air with a hiss of steam. Adreus stared at his father. Matthias drooped his shoulders, his chest barely rising and falling with each breath. Barros leaned forward, his eyes afire. Before Adreus could register the beast drawing near, the Dragon King lashed out with his mighty tail and seized the new keeper. His tail wrapped around Adreus's torso and squeezed. Adreus gasped against the crushing pain. The tables had turned. With the keeper's life fading, the lightstone's vibrancy dimmed alongside the waning faith of the human. Adreus choked out a plea, but it fell deafly. The beast growled, its lips curling in a sinister grin. You thought you could beat me? Far better than you have tried. And failed. Those words drew Matthias's attention, and the former keeper frowned, but said nothing. Barros hissed another steamy breath and held Adreus out over the edge of the tower. The keeper dangled precariously. Fear washed over him as he looked to the ground looming ominously below. If anything else had appeared more like a final moment in his short life, he couldn't think of it. He let out another gasp, fighting to breathe. Ribs cracked as Barros squeezed tighter. His time was up. Even with the lightstone in his possession, he felt powerless, hopeless. You will join the masses in their ashen graves for your defiance. Hand over the stone and surrender its power to me, or die a coward's death. Barros spoke through clenched teeth, seething. Adreus looked at the stone. It barely held a glimmer of light. Don't listen to his lies.
He is the deceiver that brought darkness to our world. Stand against it,
Matthias said. The former keeper stood boldly as the flaming chains of the afterlife lapped towards his face.
You're the only one who can.
Barros cut his eyes to the spirit and lashed out with razor-sharp talons. Adrius watched in horror as the physical and spiritual realms met with the Dragon King's strike. It should have been impossible for Barros to exist in two realms at once, but there was no denying his power. Matthias was thrown back on his haunches and slammed against the stone wall. Matthias grappled with his fiery restraints, but it was futile. He glanced at his son and called out,
"Let it go!"
Adrius looked at the stone in his hand. It was his birthright to be the keeper. No sooner than he had taken on the mantle, his father wanted him to give it up. How could he let it go? "I can't!" His voice shook through his quivering lips. He was on the verge of tears. His failure was imminent.
"You must!" "Silence!"
Barros roared. He drew Adrius near enough that the heat from his breath choked the keeper.
"Give me the Lightstone, now!"
Adrius swallowed hard. His head felt like an anvil from the blood rush. He dared a peek at his father, who lay crumpled against the stone wall, languishing in roaring, fiery torment. He knew the spirit could be another one of Barros's tricks, but in either case, he was at a loss. There was no other choice. Adrius released his grip on the Lightstone and let it fall.
"No!"
Barros wailed. The Dragon King flung Adrius back towards his father and leaped from the tower. Adrius scrambled to his feet. His father's ghost was gone. He gawked at the empty space where the former keeper had laid. "It was a trick to get me to give up the Lightstone," Adrius choked before he ran to the ledge and peered over. Barros chased the Lightstone in a race toward the ground, but beyond the Dragon King's pursuit, Adrius's eyes caught something else, a radiance beyond anything he had ever seen. And that light shone like a beacon onto something else. His father. Adrius searched for a way down, and his eyes fell upon a rope tied to a pillar. He grasped it and tossed it over the side. He tug-checked before flinging himself over in a mad dash toward the inevitable battle below. His hands burned against the rope, but he bit back the pain and continued. The fight wasn't over. Not until Barros was dead. Or he was. The clash of a sword against razor-sharp talons filled his ears when his feet touched the ground. He spun around to see more than his father had taken to the fight. There were dozens of men, apparitions like his father, waging war against the beast, berating him with their weapons. Adrius reached for his sword, but the scabbard was empty. He glanced to the top of the tower, remembering that it had been knocked from his hands during their skirmish. All he had left was a small dagger barely the width of his palm, but it was better than nothing. He sprinted towards the dragon, leaping onto its back and thrusting the blade against armored scales. Barros howled and shook. The force of his movements knocked Adrius down and onto his back. His massive tail swung in the keeper's direction, but Adrius ducked before it took his head off. The warriors shouted in a cacophony of bloodlust, and none louder or more vigorous than Matthias. The former keeper of light barked in rage with every strike of his sword. He held the Lightstone like a shield, bearing the brunt of the Dragon King's wrath. Adrius marveled at the scene. All these men were spirits held to ransom by the dark magic that swept the land, but they fought to preserve lives not their own. They were heroes, just like his father had been, like Adrius wanted to be. The keeper felt the veil of deceit lift from his heart and his mind. In a moment of pure clarity, he recognized the truth that had succumbed to the darkness for many years. He had the power to fight this evil all along, if not for his fear of failure holding him back. "Not any longer," he swore. Adrius rose and ran back into the heat of the battle, unwilling to sit idle with the world at stake. He would fight until his dying breath, and if the Lightstone willed it, beyond that. Adrius rushed under the dragon. He joined the choir of war cries as he slashed and stabbed with his dagger. The scales of the beast deflected his blade, but he kept slashing with conviction. He jutted away from the trampling feet and caught sight of a chink in the Dragon King's armor. One of his scales had pulled away from his body and exposed a weak point. Adreus dove for it and ran the blade through to the hilt. Dark blood spurt forth from the wound, covering the keeper's hand. He thrust once more, driving the blade deep into the belly of the beast. Barros howled. Fire spewed, and he thrashed desperately. It was the distraction the other warriors needed. The collective swarmed the embodiment of evil, lashing out with the fury of 1,000 scorned men. The roars grew weak, and then they grew silent. As quickly as the melee began, it was over. Adreus panted as the dragon toppled into a heap of smoldering ash. Barros's body decayed before Adreus's eyes and left behind a piece that hadn't touched the land in years. Not only did the Dragon King disappear, but so did the warriors who assembled to fight him. The keeper watched unblinkingly as their remains were swept up by the wind and carried away until Adreus was left alone.
"Who were they?"
he said, while the remains scattered across the newly blooming landscape. The scarred ruins he encountered before were replaced by lively, rolling hills. The grass was so green the keeper pinched himself to know he wasn't imagining what he witnessed.
"They were the ones who came before us."
The hairs on the back of Adreus's neck rose as the voice continued.
"You did good, son."
Adreus peered back, with tear-filled eyes, to see Matthias beaming down at him. "Father?" Matthias nodded.
"I spent a lot of time with our ancestors. You wouldn't believe their stories. You'll have to hear them some."
Adreus crashed into his father, latching onto him for dear life. "I missed you more than I can ever say." Matthias returned the embrace, patting his son's back.
"I missed you too, son. I don't have a lot of time left. The light is calling me home. But I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you."
Adreus choked back a sob. "I'm proud of you too," he said, feeling the weight of years of resentment wash away. He felt shame for thinking the worst of his father, but he knew those thoughts weren't his own. It was the darkness that afflicted him. Perhaps running away hadn't allowed me to escape the Dragon King's dark magic after all, he thought. Matthias smiled. "That's good." They stood in silence a moment before both moved to speak. "You first," his father said. "I'm sorry I ever doubted you," Adreus said as he wiped away tears. Matthias sighed. "You don't have to be sorry. I doubted myself, and that was how he defeated me. But in the end, you didn't let doubt stop you from trusting me one last time." He lifted the lightstone. It shone brighter than the shining sun, even after the crimson clouds had departed. "I guess I did," Adreus replied with a smile. "I have to go. Not because I want to, but because I must. I just didn't want to leave without saying goodbye. This is in your hands now. As you said, you're the keeper." Matthias handed his son the lightstone, and Adreus stood staring at it for a moment before looking up. He expected to see his father beaming back at him, but Matthias was gone. All that was left was scattering ash. Adreus remained in stoic silence as the newfound sunlight washed over him. For the first time in many years, there was hope for a brighter tomorrow. "Goodbye, Father," Adreus whispered as he stared at the lightstone, knowing his father's presence was still with him. It always had been. The thought brought a smile to his lips, and 3 little words. "I love you."
I hope you enjoyed listening to Keeper of Light by Drew Avera, narrated by Paeter Frandsen of Christian Geek Central. If you want to read more by Drew, go to drewavery.wordpress.com to find more of his books. You can also find albums with his fantasy and sci-fi orchestral music, which I'm eager to check out because I'm always looking for stuff to listen to while writing. I'll have a direct link in the show notes, but I'll give you a hint. Avery is spelled Avera, instead of the way I know you all pictured it in your heads. Except for those of you who don't picture words in your heads, which is one of those fascinating psychology things I like to Google, but don't have time to talk about on the podcast. If you enjoyed listening to Paeter narrate the story, you might also enjoy listening to his audio dramas at spiritblade.com or his podcast, Christian Geek Central, where he discusses movies, video games, and all things enjoyed by self-proclaimed geeks from a Christian worldview. Season 2 of the podcast will be done the end of May. It's all filled up and mostly recorded, but I'm already reading stories and booking people for Season 3, which starts in August, so don't hesitate to apply with your own short story or to nominate another author. Check out the contact page on the website where you can find an application form for authors, as well as a contact form for readers. Now for the fun announcements. I mentioned this in my newsletter last week, but Paeter and I will be hosting a booth at the Realm Makers Expo this year. If you haven't heard of Realm Makers, it's a writers' conference geared toward Christian authors who write fantasy, sci-fi, and all other sorts of speculative fiction. But this year, they're adding a new component alongside the writers' conference. They've partnered with a couple of Christian gaming conferences to put on an expo, not just for readers and gamers, but fans of film, video games, comics, board games, role-playing games, trading card games, TV series, and novels. It's being held in Grand Rapids, Michigan, July 18th through 20th. So, if you're a writer, check out the Realm Makers Conference. And if you're a gamer, check out the Christian Game Developers Conference. And then make sure to stop in the expo to hunt down the Finding Fantasy Reads table and hang out with Paeter and me. I'm not entirely sure what all we'll be doing at our booth, but we'll have stuff for the podcast, my books, Paeter's audio dramas, and his Christian Geek Central community. So if you have ideas, send them my way. And be sure to mark it on your calendars, July 18th through 20th in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The other fun news is that the Finding Fantasy Reads podcast is a finalist in the SELA Awards for Best Solo and Co-Hosted Podcasts. My good friend CJ also had her podcast, Read Clean YA with CJ, make the finalists list in the Best Interview Podcasts, so we can keep rooting for each other while still rooting for our own podcasts. The winners will be announced at the Blue Ridge Mountains Christian Writers Conference at the end of May. I love seeing how this podcast has continued growing, and I'm so grateful for all the ways you all support it. Thank you all for listening, and happy reading.